Welcome back to Law News Network. I'm your host, Jesse Weber. You're watching the testimony of George Anthony, Casey Anthony's father, in the 2011 murder trial of Casey Anthony. I'm here with criminal defense attorney Ken Belkin, one of my good friends from law school. Good to see you, Ken.
Good to see you again, Jesse.
So, you heard what was just happening in that testimony. You know, it's funny looking at it now when you see the verdict, but I like going back, and I think it's important that we go back because this July 5th marked the 6th-year anniversary of the verdict in this trial. So it's important to see where did the prosecution go wrong and where did the defense go right. That was an important point at the very end when Prosecutor Ashton said, if you had taken the body, she drowned in the pool, you taken that Kaylee's body and put it in the woods, there wouldn't be any evidence in that car, correct? And he said, no, there wouldn't have been, because what we do have is evidence in that car. We had evidence. We had decomposition in that trunk. We had evidence of chloroform. We had a strand of Kaylee's hair. And even at the end, that wasn't enough. So I'm curious what you thought of that argument, and in the end, it didn't really work.
No, it didn't work in the end for the prosecution. I got to say, I disagreed with that judge's ruling. I do think that question was leading, and given that Mr. Anthony was a prosecution witness, they're supposed to ask open-ended questions, and that was as leading a question as you could find, proposing a hypothetical and then eliciting a yes or no answer from it. That's only questions that are permissible to be asked on cross-examination. But look, I also think that it's not the best question to ask. Like, is George Anthony really an expert of what may or may not be in a trunk under a hypothetical? I don't know that it goes to prove anything, really.
If he's a suspect, if he's involved in this, if he's a key player in it, then it might. But then again, like you said, he's not an expert in this. But he is a key figure in the defense's narrative, am I correct?
Yeah, very key figure in the defense narrative. He was their scapegoat for a lot.
I want to read you something that I found. It's an article from juror number 3 in this case. Her name's Jennifer Ford, and she said that the jurors were sick to their stomachs when they voted that Casey Anthony would be found not guilty. She said, "I did not say she was innocent. I just said there was not enough evidence, and if you cannot prove what the crime was, you cannot determine what the punishment should be." Now, as a lawyer, I'm a lawyer, you're a lawyer, you appear before court, you want the jurors following the evidence, and you want the jurors matching that law and the facts to the evidence. In a one way, you have to commend what she's saying here, that she didn't allow emotions, she didn't allow what she wanted to happen, she had to look strictly at the evidence. But at the same time, there's a limit here because the prosecution, according to her, failed to demonstrate and prove their case. What do you make of what she said?
Look, I think it's a big triumph of the jury being charged correctly and educated by the judge, instructed on the law very well, that they were able to disconnect emotionally, and where they found reasonable doubt, they didn't let their emotions or their moral compass dictate it. They let the law dictate it, which I think is a triumph of justice in one aspect, but I do think it's terrible injustice that the prosecution really couldn't get a conviction here, that their case didn't meet the muster.
Right. According to her, she said, I couldn't make out logically the prosecution's argument because there were too many unanswered questions about how Kaylee died, including how Casey Anthony would have used chloroform to smother her 2-year-old daughter, then put her in the trunk of her car without anyone seeing her. She says, if there was a dead child in that trunk, does that prove how she died? No idea. Still, no idea. And she says, if you're going to charge someone with murder, don't you have to know how they killed someone or why they might have killed someone or have something where, when, why, how? Those are the important questions. They were not answered. She's right.
Yeah.
She's right. Well, you talked about it. It's a circumstantial case.
Circumstantial.
You can have all this evidence showing it's likely that Casey Anthony did it, but you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. It's not just more likely than not. You have to be as certain as possible that this person did it, and they didn't do it.
And I think the major hurdle for the prosecution's case is the level of decomposition that the baby's body had. Had the body not been as decomposed, would have been able to ascertain for sure a cause of death, and it would have been able to determine if it was drowning or if it was chloroform or strangulation or some other form. But the fact that it was skeletal remains, it's really hard to determine unless there was some sort of blunt force trauma to the skull exactly where the body failed and where it ceased.
Here's my problem with this whole case. I mean, I had multiple issues with it, but my concern was the defense conceded that Casey Anthony is a liar. They said that she suffered all this kind of sexual abuse when she was younger, and she had to hide her emotions in the past, and that she has lied. And this is a woman who was found guilty of 4 counts of falsifying information to the police. She has admitted that she lied about everything that she told the police, that she worked for Universal Studios, that she was, there's some nanny involved, that she lied to people. You can paint her as a liar. So why is it not so far-fetched to assume that if she could lie about what happened to her daughter in that way, couldn't she have lied about killing her daughter? That's what the part that always got me.
Just because you lie about things, and maybe you're a bad person, you're lying to the police, maybe you're a thief or a junkie, doesn't mean you're a murderer. You can't be prosecuted for those sins of the past. You have to be prosecuted based on the allegations.
Yes, I could see that, but we are talking about lying in the case of the death of her daughter.
Yeah,
and that's the real issue here. And I talked earlier. I don't remember if I asked you this question or I had asked Joyce Kendrick, but Casey gave an interview in the Associated Press where she said, "I'm still not even certain as I stand." This is recent. I'm still not even certain as I stand here today about what happened. And about the drowning defense. She goes, everyone has their theories. I don't know. As I stand here today, I can't tell you one way or another. The last time I saw my daughter, I believed she was alive and was going to be okay. And that's what was told to me. Here's my problem. What does that even mean? Because in one sentence, if you want to say that she had nothing to do with killing Kaylee, okay, that statement makes sense. I don't know what happened to my daughter.
Yeah.
But the defense's theory was she knew that Kaylee drowned and that she and George Anthony helped cover it up. Now you're saying that you don't know what happened, and I asked Cheney Mason, who is Casey Anthony's attorney, how do you explain that? And he said, well, basically she went into Casey world. She blacked out. She didn't recognize that that her daughter was dead until much later on. Yeah. I have problems with this statement. I think our viewers had problems with this statement, and I'd like to know what you think about this statement.
What I think is Casey Anthony should probably pray to whatever God she believes in every night and be thankful that the double jeopardy clause exists in our Constitution, because if not for that, she would probably be tried again and convicted. But, in all seriousness, this is a woman that did lose her daughter. It's a very traumatic experience. I can't even relate to that at all. And I think, when people go through traumatic experiences, there is a tendency to block these things out.
Yeah, you're 100% right. Can't speak to other people. How they react to grief is very different, and I respect that. At the end of the day, some people have to use common sense and figure out what does certain things mean, and sometimes it is an explanation too convenient for a case like this. We're talking about the death of a young 2-year-old girl. Her skeletal remains were found, and there was duct tape, traces of duct tape found by the skeletal remains. So something was not kosher, and that's the problem. But we were talking about one of the jurors. I actually want to talk about the jury makeup. We know that it was 7 women, 5 men. 6 of them had children, and they ranged from ages 32 to 65. They all were not so much, they weren't opposed to the death penalty. They said we would put it in, we would vote in favor of it if it was the right situation. If you were Casey Anthony's attorney, and I didn't get a chance to ask Cheney Mason this, what would you be looking for in a juror in this kind of case?
It's a good question. That is a tough one.
That is why I am the host, and I ask the questions, my friend.
The hard-hitting ones. Look, I would probably want to steer clear of people with children. I would think that they might be too emotional when rendering a verdict, and then they might be blind to any reasonable doubt that you could inject into this situation. So I think steering clear of people with children would be #1 priority. Steering clear of... Yeah, that would be the main thing. I would probably try to steer clear of women too.
Interesting. Well, there were more women, and 6 of the jurors had children. So it's tough. It's split a little bit. I think by law, though, if you're going to have a case about the death penalty, you would need all of them to at least not be opposed to it, right?
I think the law is now in Florida that it has to be unanimous. Mm-hmm. But that's for cases after they pass this new law.
Yeah. One other point before we go back to our coverage. the juror that I had mentioned, she said she was struggling between not guilty and manslaughter, which means she had ruled out first-degree murder, that it was premeditated. What do you think was going on in that sense, that in the way, just to help our viewers understand that, and this might have been something that a few other jurors were grappling with. Okay, you have Casey Anthony. Maybe she didn't pre-plan, she didn't predetermine, she wasn't premeditated that she was going to kill Kaylee Anthony, but could it have been a situation where her emotions took over, or she did something recklessly where she killed Kaylee? I want to just make sure we understand that a little bit better, how someone could be on the line between not guilty and manslaughter in this kind of case.
And look, as far as first-degree murder, it's well accepted that first-degree murder is a very hard charge to prove, primarily because of the element of premeditation. You know, it's not just that they intended to kill, it's that they took such deliberate steps in planning this murder out that you have to prove. Look, there's no evidence that shows that this was deliberate or even that she intended to kill the baby, unless, you know, the Google searches are problematic, the chloroform. But certainly this baby died, but at this point, there really wasn't much evidence presented that tied her to the death of the child. And I think that's what the jury grappled with. They probably also grappled with the fact, look, we don't even know the cause of death. And logically, when you think about it, if you don't even know the cause of death, how can you say that the death was the result of a homicide?
And that's a great point, because that's what one of the jurors said. We didn't even know how she died. Obviously, there's theories. There's theories that Casey Anthony used chloroform and duct tape and you know, killed her in that way. Maybe she died from drowning. We don't know. We don't know. We know that she's dead. We don't know how. And I've seen this before in other cases where there's actually been a mistrial where we don't know the exact cause of death. We covered the David Criado trial here. Mistrial. Didn't know what the exact cause of death was of his child. So now we have this kind of situation. When you don't have that, it's going to be even more for the prosecution to try to put a case. Now, having said that, I have seen cases before where there's a missing person, there is no body, and the person is convicted because there's such strong forensic evidence and eyewitness testimony, which we might not have had here.
Yeah, no eyewitness testimony, no direct evidence, really just some circumstances.